Welcome to episode 145 of the Sports Geek podcast. On this week's episode, I chat with Brad Paton from the Richmond Tigers.
Welcome to the Sports Geek podcast, the podcast built for sports digital and sports business professionals. And now, here's your host, currently holding his phone up to get a better signal, Sean Callanan.
Thanks, DJ Joel. My name is Sean Callanan, and you are listening to the Sports Geek podcast. You might be doing that on our website, Sports Geek HQ, or you might be doing it on your favourite podcast platform. If you are listening to it on the website and you can't find it on your podcast app, please let us know. We have checked. It's on iTunes. It's on Stitcher. It's on my favourite app, Pocket Casts. It's not on SoundCloud anymore because I don't think SoundCloud will be around for much longer. That's just my opinion. I don't think they're doing the right thing. But yeah, let me know. I did do some extra work to make sure it's available on Windows phones because there are some people out there using Windows phones. So yeah, let me know. Sean Callanan on Twitter, on SportsBiz, Slack community, also on LinkedIn. Please reach out, even if you want to use the old-fashioned method of email. Sean@sportsgeekhq.com. Very happy to catch up with Brad Paton at the Richmond Football Club, not far from my office now. Office has moved, now based in Richmond, not too far away from the MCG. So it was a short walk across to Punt Road to talk to Brad. And a bit of a theme of a couple of previous episodes recently, Brad has a long history in the world of sports digital, especially definitely here in Australia. Where the AFL and the origin story, I guess, of the AFL club websites, and he was heavily involved with the Essendon Football Club. That was one of the clubs that went and did their own thing for a long time outside of the club network. So it's good to talk to him about his role in that work early on, and then what his career has been since then, bouncing around in some sports technology firms and some agencies, and then coming back into the fold at Richmond, into clubland, as we call it over here in Australia, working on the team side and working with such a big, passionate fan base that the Richmond Tigers do have. So here is my chat with Brad Paton, the head of digital for the Richmond Football Club. Very happy to be here at Tigerland, home of the Richmond Football Club, with Brad Paton, head of digital from the Richmond Football Club. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Sean. Thanks for having me on.
No problems. And thank you very much for jumping off the bench. My new offices is just down the road here from we're at Punt Road, home of the Richmond Football Club here in the AFL. And I had a late cancellation. They won't be named and shamed, but they know who they are. And Brad was kind enough to move his interview up. So thank you very much for coming on the show.
Happy to jump in early.
And so I wanted to, long history in sports digital, and so I want to go back into that and then come back into your sort of your Tigers role. Like myself, you have a geek background story. So you want to sort of take us back to your early days in getting into sport?
Yeah, I guess my story was a little bit unusual in that I started uni and I was really interested in computers, and this is back mid-90s. So this was just when the internet was just kind of kicking off, and go back to about sort of 1995, 1996. I was a massive Essendon fan, and this internet World Wide Web thing started happening, and I thought, I know a little bit of coding. I can do this HTML thing, and set up a little website. It was just a fans volunteer site, and worked with Essendon initially just as a bit of a volunteer, and then it became the official club website over the next couple of years, so sort of 97, 98. It was still just a volunteer thing. I was doing it because I love the club and really thought that it was a good way to connect fans, in particular fans overseas. Because if you go back to the mid-90s, that was when Essendon had an international supporter base that they would send a fax to on a monthly basis. And so they had this list of 50 fax numbers they would send it out to. So the web came along and kind of changed that whole dynamic where you could reach a lot more people for little or no money. So that's how I got involved initially. And then I went off and worked as a lawyer lawyer for a couple of years and decided I didn't really want to be a lawyer.
I know a lot of ex-lawyers. A lot of people have that same thing.
Yeah, there's a lot of people who say, I used to be a lawyer, and it's probably for a good reason. And then got back into the web and, again, working with Essendon. And then off the back of that, started a little web design company.
And that was very much in that .com, boom, sort of websites starting to become a thing. And also it was in a time from an AFL sort of digital rights perspective, it was a bit of wild, wild west. And Essendon was sort of out in their own and doing, one of these kids doing their own thing. And that was Essendon, doing their own thing where everyone else was sort of under the umbrella.
Yeah, it was an interesting time because at the time Peter Jackson was the CEO of Essendon. He's now CEO at Melbourne, and he was very bullish on the internet. He could see the main thing for him was how they could grow their database, the database of fans, and he could see by having control of all the website properties that it was that pipeline into the business. So when a lot of the clubs were doing deals and then ultimately joining the AFL Network, Peter really kicked up a bit of a stink and said, we're not joining, we want to stay on our own. And it did stay like that for quite a number of years. It held out until after Peter left, and then Ian Robson came in as CEO from Hawthorn, and he said, why aren't we part of the network? And then it kind of eventually happened.
So eventually happened, and so that sort of wrapped up a bit of your that migration, wrapped up a bit of your time, and you sort of left what we would term over here in Australia as clubland. Where did you go after that?
Yeah, so I had my little web design company doing mainly the work for Essendon, but a few other clients as well. And then I started working for what was back then IMG Sports Technology Group, which is now Sports Technology Group.
Yep.
Sort of a joint venture. They merged with Sporting Pulse recently. So I worked with them for a few years, and then I actually sort of left the sports area almost altogether just to join digital agency land, and worked for a company called Reactive, who recently got acquired by Accenture, who seem to be buying up all the agencies these days. And that was an interesting perspective, having worked with a lot of different sports and in that sports environment, and then working for clients like ANZ and Nissan and different kind of clients that weren't in that traditional sports area.
And it would have been a completely different brief, completely different pressures, in some instances completely different budgets when you're working on brand side, as opposed to the pulling of strings together and sticky tape that sometimes happens in the sports environment and limited budget and limited resources. And it sort of lets you do a few more things creatively and technically.
Yeah, it certainly did. I mean, just using ANZ as an example, they have a very large marketing budget, which they're carving out more and more for digital. So the budgets were quite big, but it's interesting because it's quite a bit harder to come up with a good creative brief around a bank as opposed to a sporting club. Where a sporting club, you've got content for days, where for a bank, you have to literally create something out of thin air normally, and that puts a lot more pressure on the creative people. And
it does lead in very well to your current role, talking about the problems that you have as a marketer for a bank, as opposed to having a passionate tribe behind a club. And, there probably isn't a more passionate tribe than the Richmond Football Club and the fans. And this is probably going to be the first time that my mum is going to listen to the podcast because she is a mad Tiger, and so are all her sisters. Tell us a little bit about, you've been now in the role as head of digital at Richmond since, nearly coming up on 12 months. And from outside looking in, everyone sort of says Richmond are this sleeping giant when they're playing well. The MCG is full and heaving and loud. They're not really a sleeping giant though. Like online, they're super loud. What's it like, sort of coming in as an outsider and seeing this Tiger army sort of starting to rally online?
Yeah, it really is an engaged, passionate supporter base, no doubt. And you can see that from the outside, but from the inside, it was interesting when I started sort of almost mid-season last year, and it was sort of after that Richmond's season took a bit of a turn for the worse. And the fans are passionate, and they'll tell you that they're unhappy. And that can be difficult when you're managing an online community, especially more around the social media side of things. So it really does put pressure on people who are managing that community, how you can look after them and make sure that they're not taking it too much to heart, which can be quite difficult when you're dealing with that day in, day out. And then the other component is your ability to push out content drops off a little bit as well when the club's not performing. You might have a funny video up your sleeve of the players, but if you post that online after a couple of losses, then you'll get smacked down by the fans straight away. So I guess you then fast forward to this year and we win the first 5 games of the year. We've lost the last 2, but the fans are all up and about again. And
I don't think it's the most amount of shares of the actual AFL ladder. I think in the first 5 weeks, it might be the bias of my Facebook feed and having a few Richmond fans that are quite happy to say where they are on the ladder. But yeah, when they're up and about, they are definitely up and about Tiger fans. So how, from a digital strategy point of view, how do you manage both that an emotional roller coaster, but then also go, how do I engage those fans that, when we win, they are so behind us and will amplify and share our content, but then also reaching those fans that are ready, and again, you've seen the memes of the Tigers bandwagon, like when they're up and about, everyone comes back in the fold, and you want to make sure that those ones that are just coming back in the fold sort of deepen in a little bit more or come to the next game. So how do you sort of manage that from a digital strategy point of view and the content you're putting out?
Yeah, one of the sort of the mantras I've got, and a lot of people have it, it's we need to have the right people in the right place at the right time to get that content. So having the people on the ground to make use of Snapchat stories, Instagram stories, getting that one picture in the rooms after the game that is going to get you more likes than anything else. Like, go back a few rounds when Dusty copped a knock and had a black eye, and made sure we got that picture in the rooms. Our social media team did a great job to get him, and the likes go through the roof. So getting that kind of content is important. So then you capitalise on that. Ultimately then gets more reach. If you're getting more likes, whether it's on Facebook or Instagram, generally that post will get more reach, and then hopefully you get more people coming on board. And then the ultimate strategy is to then convert those through the consumer team, either into members or buying merchandise or tickets to games.
And it is very much a thing. And I've had a few international friends come to the footy with me recently, and one of the things I have to explain to them is after a win, 22 grown men will all hug and sing a song, and they're "Oh, We're From Tigerland" again is an absolutely cracking song from a theme, and then when you've got 70,000 fans singing it. They must see it on. So there's absolute riots if it's not shown on the television coverage. For starters, if they go to the news and haven't shown the song, the Channel 7s will hear about it. But it's great for you from a social point of view because you go, "There's the win. Here's the song, everybody." And as a Tigers fan, you can't not like it.
And we get a fair bit of mileage out of that because we will. While the song's being sung, we will generally have a very short snippet on Snapchat and Instagram stories. We'll also take a still image that we will post on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, everything. Then we'll follow that up with a video that we'll put on our website, across our mobile app, mobile site, website, and then we'll follow that up with a Facebook video. So we're literally getting, out of one piece of content, we're multiplying it out sort of by create 6 or 7 pieces of content. And it's that engaging, that's the stuff that the fans love.
And it is important, it is that, how many times can you cut up the turkey and putting it on different platforms, but you've got to do that. And when it's the killer piece, and the fans just get to, they start to expect it, and so you want to deliver it to them, and it's super important from that point of view. So I guess a couple of questions I want to have for you as someone who's been in Clubland and then out of Clubland and back. 6 years is roughly sort of your time between Essendon and Richmond. I know, you worked in the sports space with Sports TG and some stuff with Reactive. But what's been some of the things you've come back into Clubland and saying, this is different, or what have been some of the lessons sort of coming back in?
Yeah, I guess in that time, there's probably the two standouts are scale. So now, if I go back 10 years when doing the Essendon stuff, then that was sort of towards the end of my time with Essendon. It was really just 2 of us who were doing most of the digital work. And now my team is, depending on how you cut it up, because there's a few people who have shared roles, it's sort of 6 or 7 headcount. And we do, in the content production side, video production, it's not just the pure football stuff, because we help support the rest of the business. Richmond's got a fairly diverse business now in terms of a health and fitness arm and an education piece with Swinburne University. So we help support them by creating videos in-house that they would have had to externally source, which would have cost more money. So I think scale is one thing. And the second thing is obviously just the impact of social media, and in particular the juggernaut that is Facebook. Yeah. And it's almost a little bit scary, the power that Facebook has now in terms of the amount of referral traffic and how much we rely on that to reach people. So it's good because it allows us to reach people, but it's their dominance is a little bit frightening at times.
It is a little bit, but it definitely is the fact that you've now got a fully fledged media team. Again, going back, to the 2010, 2011, that type of era, it was, small teams getting out what they can, video getting crunched, whereas now you have dedicated video people that are both working on the content side, but also potentially might have been helping out some of the operation stuff, or, like you're saying, working in other parts of the business. And then, the whole social thing, I say it like it's how are you going to manage all of these different platforms? And it's a resource intensive thing. Like, there's another platform. Snapchat wasn't something that everyone was playing with 18 months, 2 years ago, and now it's something that we're putting attention into. Insta stories, all of that kind of stuff is becoming a resource heavy thing, but it allows you to tell that, tell that story more. So from your point of view, like when I'm talking to people from a digital point of view, there are geeks. I think you're in the geek tribe, but then there's also the journalist storytelling piece. Where does that fit for you? Like, what from an importance point of view, telling Richmond's story, and so where else do you get inspiration from, both inside the business and inside your team?
Yeah, the storytelling angle is critical, and it was actually one of the good things about going away from football for a while and working at a digital agency and working with some really clever creative directors, because the way that they analyse a problem and try to tell those stories is really clever. And so for us, we know that the best pieces of content that we put out, apart from your highlights and all that stock standard footy stuff, it's when you can actually give the fans some insight either into personalities or into events that have happened that really gets under the hood and tells the stories.
So is there particular content pieces or stories that you've told in the last 12 months that have really hit the mark? And again, these are the kind of things where people look at it from the outside and you don't know how successful it is. But if it's really hitting the mark with, a younger fan demographic, because that's what you're doing it for, it ticks the box. Or if you're trying to we want to make sure our members see this and know our players. Have you got examples of that you're saying, this is working well, whether it be video or, long form content type of stuff?
I think some of the pieces that have done really well are some of the stories that we can tell around the work we do with the Indigenous community. So Richmond has the KGI Institute, which is sort of our Indigenous institute. But as part of that, there's also a program called MITS, where it's a transition school for Indigenous students to come down to Melbourne, generally from up north, and spend some time at the club doing schoolwork. And the players have really bought into this, and they're really involved with the kids. So some of the stories around that and putting those online, it gives people an insight into a different side to some of these. They see the players run around on the ground, but they don't really get to understand what they're like as people. So when you can provide that human element to it, they're generally things that do quite well.
Okay. One of the things I'm always asking, I guess, people like yourself in the digital space, what are the key numbers? We talk about on-field stuff, and there's key stats that are being tracked on the field and stuff, that kind of thing. From your point of view, from a digital point of view, what are some of the numbers that you're getting your team to look at, or saying this is what we're looking at internally? What's your week-to-week numbers that you look at?
Yeah, it's interesting. So I'm just finalising a new sort of reporting dashboard. And the thing about digital, there are so many numbers that you can get lost in everything. And the traditional metrics are coming, they're still important, but maybe not as important. So what we're really looking for is the engagement levels. So there's some interesting numbers, certainly, that you can pull out of social that say the number of likes per 1,000 users per tweet or per Facebook post. So those to track those metrics is really interesting because it gives you a finger on the pulse of what the fans are thinking. Another one is sort of video views per unique browser, because that shows us sort of the engagement levels of the video content that we're putting up there. Higher the better, obviously. And then sort of on that as well is the completion rates of videos. So are people actually watching it past the first 10, 20 seconds towards the end? So those sort of engagement metrics, like we still track total number of followers and total number of page views are becoming a little bit less important, but all of those traditional numbers, and they're important to show the size of the audience, but we really want to know, do they like what we're doing? Is it engaging enough content that people really want to look at?
And I think sort of going back to your point before of, the size of Facebook and how much it controls things. Sometimes some of those numbers, if they are Facebook's numbers, it can be really disheartening if they make a switch to their algorithm and say, oh, that's not happening anymore. Talking to a few teams, they're seeing their web traffic, drop as an overall thing. Why? Well, because probably they're consuming more content on Facebook. They're getting their fill potentially of videos and that on Facebook, so people aren't going. And then the other part is, where I do struggle with, what do you say what the engagement rate is? Because the bigger you are, potentially the worse your engagement rate is, and it's counterintuitive to go, let's grow our audience. So there's I think it is something that you say, as a benchmark, you can see things are going, but also have that knowledge that, if a twist gets made or a tweet gets made to say Facebook, that those numbers may fall off a cliff in some instances.
Yeah, so it happens all the time, that Facebook changed the algorithm and your reach you might put out exactly the same type of post one week to the next week, and the reach will go down by 50%. And, the cynics in us will say that's because they want us to pay for the advertising space on Facebook. But, they use a whole bunch of different things to go into that.
But then the other part of it is, how do you communicate that knowledge and how that's important sort of up the chain, up the executives. If they go, hey, Brad, what's happened? Our videos have dropped, or our traffic is dropped, or why is it up? Why can't every video be like that? How are you what are the conversations you're having to say, well, this is why, this is where our numbers, how are you communicating that both, across the organisation, but then, up and down, so people have an idea of what you're doing?
Yeah, I think that's where it's important to have, it's all well and good to have your reporting dashboards, but to have annotated insights is the more critical part, to say, well, why did a certain thing change or happen? And we're pretty lucky here. We've got a really engaged, Brendan Gale, the CEO, is really engaged when it comes to digital, so he understands that. And I think our board is reasonably good as well. In particular, a couple of recent appointees who have got backgrounds with digital, so they kind of do understand the vagaries of some of these numbers. But you certainly do need to be when I look at data, it's all well and good to have that data, but unless you're drawing out some of those insights, then it's not really that useful.
And that's why for me, for some of it, I do drill in on, yes, the big numbers are great. Here's our like numbers and here's our total engagement, and that's great. But if you're and it's different for everybody. If someone says we want to have more people at our games, how do we start measuring that? Or we want to engage a certain demographic, how do we measure that? And one of the easiest ones when you're working with your video guys is to take them behind the scenes and see what the audiences that Facebook can build, like here's who's seen it for 3 seconds, here's who's seen it for 10 seconds, here's who's seen it for 95%. And getting them that visibility of seeing it, knowing what that number is, but then going a little bit further and driving in and going, what age group is in that demographic? And testing the assumptions of, I've produced this video for young kids, or I've produced it for, this is a looking back historical one. I expect the older Tiger fans to be watching it. Am I correct in that assumption? And so sometimes diving in on that and sort of saying, oh, this is how engaged this demographic is, and communicating that's really important as well, because you can just say, we don't need to have this be a viral video that everyone loves. We just want to hit this market up, this particular segment up really hard and make sure that they love it.
Absolutely. And we put out a survey towards the end of last year, and it asked a whole range of questions about the different types of content and platforms people were using. And you could definitely see the trends between the different age groups, demographics. And what was important for us, for example, this year, again, non-traditional football, but for the educational piece I was talking about before, they were targeting 17 to 21-year-olds who were just leaving school, wanting to work out what course they were going to go into. And that's the power of something like Facebook, where you can target in and create those custom audience lists and really get that better sort of ROI on your ad dollar spend. And it's kind of hard for any other advertising platform to compete with that when you can drill down so granular into the target people that you want to get on board.
Yeah, and I think having that sort of having a bit of data focus and knowledge in your digital team to go, well, you guys need to know this. Like nothing. As a bit of a motivator, I always show digital teams to say, hey guys, look at this. This is what the membership base looks like. And they're like, oh yeah, that looks right. They're about that age, and yeah, we're 8. This is what the profile. Yeah, that looks right. And then you say, oh, these are the fans that are going to your site. Oh, hang on, that's not the same. These are the fans that are paying members of your club that like you on Facebook. Hang on, where did those guys go? And it's like, oh. And they get really offended. Like, they're members, they say they follow a club. Why aren't they liking us? And it's like, well, that's where you start saying, well, if it's that certain demographic, well, we need to make sure we put some content out for them and do something to bring them in. Because, and usually it is that older demographic that they don't even know that you're producing all this content. So it's a bit of how do we make sure that they do it? And it might be, let's make sure the content we push gets shared more and into those feeds. But it is terribly motivating. Like, the people walk out of the room and go, oh, we've got to go get those, there's new fans out there. So just having that knowledge, at your own team level to go, let's go do a bit of content and see if we can really hit that mark, that section, and sort of go from there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Recently had a chat with Jen Van Dyke at the Clippers around where digital partnerships work, and, really terrific structure that they've done with partnerships and digital reporting to Jen, and having a real digital first sort of approach. How does that the digital partnership sort of piece work at Richmond? Where's your role in that? Because it's it's still a growing and developing area. How does it work for you guys?
Yeah, look, it's a really important part of my role to work really closely with the commercial partnerships team, and that's to work on sort of existing partnerships, and because every single partner now in their contract has some kind of clause around their digital obligations, which is great because that helps us sort of drive that. We can point to that ROI across the business. So one of my key roles is to work with my team to ensure that we're doing the right types of activities that can flow into a commercial partnership model. And so I'll spend quite a lot of my time looking at numbers, looking at the reporting for a partner to see which campaigns are on track, how they're going, but also then to work across a sort of a cross-discipline team to come up with ideas that we could take to partners and say, we think this is a good content piece for you because it's an authentic integration from a brand perspective. So an easy example of that was Bang & Olufsen recently came on as the AV partner. We've got a podcast, didn't have a commercial partner. So bang, that's a really easy one.
Yep.
But we also spend time coming up with new ideas, and it's important to also get the buy-in from the players and the coaches around that, because if you're going to use them as talent for some of these content pieces, you want them to be comfortable in doing what they're doing. So ideas that work across the whole business can then, the commercial partnerships team can it makes it an easy sell into the partner because everyone's bought into it.
And that's where the conversation with Jen went, but having the digital team have that commercial focus, savviness of, hey, we're producing this, how can we pitch this back to commercial, or how can we pitch this back to one of our partners, is really important, because if it comes from that place, that's great. If it comes from commercial, you also want them to come to you and say, rather than, here's the thing, please produce it, which is the worst way of doing it, or here's the sponsor, they want this kind of stuff, Brad, what have you got? And so it's a bit of, I think the digital teams that are successful and are doing a good job they're building out assets. They're building out something, they're thinking, well, you can't sell something you can't name. So, building something, saying it's a thing, and then going, hey, look, this is a thing. This, we do this every week. The fans love it. It's a pure fan engagement piece, but we know that they love it. So now we can go back to them, back to a partner and say, would you like to be part of this? Because we are on podcasts, and you did perfectly segue into it.
Unintentional, of course.
Not of course, but talking about Talking Tigers, I'm a big fan of podcasting, and it's a different form of content, because it's so long form, right? And you get into the ears of your customers for 20, 30 minutes when every other piece of the internet is getting shorter all the time, right? Videos, no, 15 seconds is too long. We can only do 12. Even though we've killed off Vine, we're still good for 6-second videos, right? How have you found? Because Talking Tigers has been going for a little while now.
Yeah.
And it's been a consistent club show in the AFL landscape. You've now got a sponsor. How have you found the podcast experience? How has the Tiger Army accepted it? What have been some of your lessons from it?
Yeah, it's been interesting coming in. It was going for a number of years before I started, and the way it was set up was it's really as an entertainment podcast. So there's so much hard footy news out there. It's almost saturation point across the whole industry. The fans want some entertainment as well, and this provides an opportunity. So we're lucky in that we've got a guy like Richo, Matthew Richardson, to come in and be the host, and his personality across the whole of AFL is well known. But he gets to talk with Tony Greenberg, who's been around Richmond for I should know, but it's possibly decades.
Yep.
But his knowledge around the club is great. And then you've got my digital marketing manager, digital guru, Josh Berryman, who completes the trio. So for them, it provides a platform to be able to take their time and crack some jokes and tell some funny stories. But at the same time, provide the diehard fans with everything that they need. And so I think there's a couple of types of audience. There's the rusted on fans that will listen to it all the time. But I think they do such a great job that we're trying to maximise the exposure through a number of different channels now. And we're going to start to sort of video a couple of segments and put them out as sort of teasers to link people back to the podcast and grow that audience even further.
And, for mine, as a podcaster and a promoter of podcasts, getting people to listen to podcasts and to subscribe to podcasts is an everlasting challenge. Right? Please subscribe to the Sports Geek podcast. You can find it in iTunes. I have to say it every single episode. And no one's really solved the discovery part of podcasts. I think the opportunity now is with the Serials of the world, S-Town, with what Bill Simmons has done at The Ringer. Like, more people are getting accustomed to listening to podcasts. So once you start listening to podcasts, you go, this is good. I want to listen to more podcasts. I'm happy with on demand, right? People are getting used to on demand. They understand Netflix and Hulu and Stan and these kind of things. So it's making more sense. I've found I think it's 3 years I've been podcasting. I'm explaining what is a podcast less, right? I probably will have to explain it again when I tell Mum how to listen to this one, but everybody else is starting to get it, whether it's using Pocket Casts or iTunes. But then, I always look at what you can do to promote your podcast outside your podcast. So doing things like, again, following what Bill Simmons did at Grantland and saying, well, you're not a podcast listener, but you want to watch it on YouTube. We'll do YouTube clips. Seeing what Bleacher Report and those kind of guys are doing around quotes from presses and stuff like that, and putting them out on Instagram. We've started doing that on Sports Geek and mine, and saying, oh, here's a quote from the podcast. Oh, and then you go, oh, I didn't even realise you had Jen on, or Damien from the Cleveland Cavaliers. So it's those kind of things that are really important around promoting a podcast, and it's not a just put it out and it'll go.
And hope for the best.
And hope for the best. So
cross promotion is really important. Like you think, TV networks have been good at it for decades, where one show will cross promote another show. So we're starting to do a bit more of that, and that's a way to tap into that audience that probably don't even know that this particular bit of content's there, or they might look at it and go, "Oh, it's not really for me." If you can give them the highlights, give them the little 10-second snippet, and go, "Oh, that's actually either pretty funny or it's engaging," they might then decide to switch on.
And it's you've got to get a balance too, because if you, like, I love the idea of saying, "Oh, here's what you missed. Oh, Richo told a great story," but don't tell it. Like, you've got to go listen.
Give the teaser,
right?
Yeah.
You've got to tease it, because if you every week tell them everything that's in there, I don't know if I'm listening, because you're telling me and I quickly read, oh, they're the highlights. And I think the other part is also the format and what you go about, because like in any sport, there's lots of talking heads talking about football or talking about basketball. And, are you going to tune in to find out how, Dusty's hamstring's going, right? Whereas you do want the deeper stories around the club, a little bit of history, find out from Richo that, what's been happening on the track, or, he spoke to Dusty in the coffee shop, that kind of stuff. You want your people leaning in, listening a little bit harder, and it's, becomes your own, pre-game show. I think podcasts are really good in that space where you can say, you're heading to the game, here's the best 20 minutes, and you just put it in and you're all fired up for the game.
Yeah, you want to take them into that, feel like you're taking them into the inner sanctum and giving them a little bit of something that they can't get anywhere else, because as you say, there are a lot of talking heads. And, one of the most popular segments on the podcast is Chief Watch, where Brendan Gale, nicknamed the Chief, they'll make something up. Actually, they don't necessarily make up the stories. They're mostly true, but they embellish them a little bit about something outlandish that Brendan's done in the last week. And, those sort of little regular segments as well help to create a show that is ongoing and people look forward to each week. Yeah.
So that's where I like, that's where I think podcasting fits. I think the other place, which I'll be really interested to hear, which should be out soon. The guys at ESPN are going to do a 30 for 30 podcast audio series. And I think, the guys at the Trailblazers have done one called The Trail, where it is that longer storm forward narrative style podcast where we're just going to talk about our logo and the origins of our logo, or we're going to talk about the 1977 season. And again, it's for a particular demographic, but it's evergreen, right? So, you miss Talking Tigers and you come back and there's another episode. If you're super diehard, you might go back and listen, but there is a little bit of talking about what's on this week and that, who we're playing this week. But something that's longer form where you say, yeah, we're going to talk to someone about the great Jack Dyer and, some of the best stories. And it's like, well, that's a Jack Dyer. Of course I'm going to listen to that episode. So I think there's an opportunity in that space. I think that, when you listen to guys like Gimlet Media doing things like Startup and those type of narrative, it's just the amount of work to produce them, because they're almost the same as a video documentary.
That's, I think, our biggest challenge is it does eat out a lot of time every Tuesday for everyone who's involved. So, we've got Gav who does the audio production, and then the 3 on-air guys. That's 4 people spending a few hours each on a Tuesday to produce this one show. So you want to maximise that audience, because you want to get that return.
Yeah, exactly. So and that's where the pub, ticking all the boxes, getting it on the right platforms, telling people to subscribe, the cross promotion piece, and this applies to everything. It's not just podcasting, because it is very much like you said before. If people knew about it, they'd listen to it, and so you've got to go, I've got to still promote it. And I think as content producers, you get so focused on, hey, we've got to produce the content, but the marketing of the content and telling people about the content, it's a never-ending thing. You're always got to be telling people, hey, this is really good. Whether it's hey, we just did this great video series, but you've got to come to the site to watch it. So how do we pull them in? Some of that is learning from the BuzzFeeds of the world to the clickbaity headline.
The clickbait, we don't do a lot of it, but every now and then there's something that lends itself to it. So for example, probably the best example what we did last year was around trade and draft period, where you make list changes. You don't tell them who you've dropped off the list. You just Richmond made list changes, and it's amazing the amount of clicks that you get through.
Yeah, the otherwise known in Melbourne as the Triple M approach to every single article.
That's right.
But it is, and I do think it is something you use sparingly, because if you go
you'll annoy
all the time.
Oh,
People, and again, if you go to, and again, it's a tactic, but if you go to any Triple M footy thing, someone goes to the first comment and says, so-and-so got delisted, saved you a click.
Yep.
Right? Yep. So it is something that you've got to be careful for. Last thing I want to do is just pretty much just touch base on what platforms are working for you guys in 2017. We already talked about Facebook being the beast that it is. Where are you finding the other ones, if we're sort of, ranking them, but where are you finding the other platforms, Twitter? How are you finding that from an engagement point of view, the usage, that kind of thing? Is it more, less?
Yeah, I mean, Twitter's an interesting one. I mean, a lot's been spoken about Twitter in the last 12 months. Is it dying? What's happening? It's still important for us, but in terms of just the reach and engagement levels, it's probably lowest on the list. Instagram is one of the shining stars.
It's just growing.
Owned by Facebook. But, I look at our reach and engagement numbers on Instagram, and they just continue to grow, growing at obviously at a faster rate than Facebook. And then the big question mark is what's going to happen to Snapchat. And one of the issues we've got is there's just no analytics behind it. So you can tell how many people have seen your story, but that doesn't really give you an indication of what the overall audience size is. So, but we still do it because we think it's really important to tap into that, for want of a better term, that millennial demographic, because we know that they're big on that platform. So we kind of still hit across that. But in terms of where we put our efforts, obviously we've got to keep Facebook churning over, because that drives a lot of the traffic.
And it's a content beast that keeps wanting more content.
It is. It's a bit scary, but look, from a growth perspective and an engagement point of view, I think Instagram has really come on in leaps and bounds in the last year or so. And
I think Twitter, I think it doesn't pivot very quickly, and it hasn't ever. But I can see it slowly moving. Like, it is moving towards more of a media company, doing more media deals. We could see them pivot to a certain degree to be Netflixy almost, with the rights that they're trying to garner. I mean, Twitter and sports have always been a marriage where it does make sense, and you do tune in. Especially with the broadcasts, and it is that that secondary commentator, but it's still a matter of where is the next people, what's the next piece of engagement. It's sort of leveled out, and that's where it's at. And it's like, if more video comes about, if it does get more people on, who would have thought 6 months ago that the latest quarterly things that Twitter added more people, more daily actives than Snapchat in the last quarter. Yeah. Right? That's, no one you would never have bet on that. Everyone was, calling for Twitter's death and saying, hey, we're done, Snapchat's this, and this whole, Insta, Facebook, Snapchat copy wars that are currently on, we don't know how they're going to wash out. And I agree with you from a Snapchat point, you've still got to be in that space, because they have been one of the most innovative companies, and they are pushing Facebook to follow that innovation. So you don't know where they're going to be in 18 months. So it's a bit hedging your bets, because there's always been an advantage being early on all of the platforms and understanding them a little bit better.
Yeah, absolutely.
So want to finish up with the closing five. Do you remember what your first sports event you ever attended was?
I would have to think that it would have been an Essendon game, because my parents are both mad Essendon fans.
Out at Windy Hill, were you like standing on steel cans, maybe?
We had the mum and dad had seats on the wing out at Windy Hill for a number of years, and it was a fair trek. We used to be down the peninsula, so it was an hour and a half drive each way. So not too bad if you win, but it's a long way to go.
It would be a long drive home, but okay. Out at Windy Hill, out in the suburbs then. From a what's your favourite food at a sports event, or something that has been memorable?
Yeah, I'm probably going to be that traditional footy fan and say the meat pie because you grow up on that, and that's impartial to a hot dog as well. But I think the Aussie meat pie.
It is. They keep trying to bring in more and more gourmet food, and yet you still end up going to a meat pie with sauce.
I must admit, I don't mind the South Melbourne dim sims that they've now got in one of the bars at the MCG now. So.
Oh well, I'll have to find out where that is.
Yeah.
The South
in the
Melbourne
MCC.
I'll see. I don't get access to that. I'm out with the riffraff in the Ponsford Sand. The first app that you open in the morning is.
It's probably pretty boring, but a lot of the time it's actually my email. Check what's coming overnight. But apart from that, it's the other main one would be Facebook.
Yep, sort of checking in. Email is normally one. Is there someone that you suggest the Sports Geek podcast listeners should follow, and why?
Yeah, it's interesting. I was thinking about this. I follow such a range. I think more it's actually probably the aggregators, sort of like Sports Techie and Sports Geek. These sorts of ones that I can get that quick fix on what articles and things I should be looking at. There are some really good digital strategy people that don't necessarily work in sport that I follow. Can't think of any particular names off the top of my head, but I can send you a note about that. Yeah,
that's all right. But and I find, because we sort of started in the sports digital space at the same time, like this, I'm still following and keeping in touch with a lot of those people early on, and I really do feel, and this is again, problem of Twitter. It's if you're joining now, you can't find those people.
Yeah, there's a lot of noise.
So it's really hard to, and they're tweeting less. Yeah. There's not that conversation type of stuff happening.
Yeah, I'm tweeting a lot less than I used to. If you look at my Twitter feed.
Yeah, but I think that conversation or that sharing, I think that's happening more on LinkedIn now. I think what Microsoft has done, and again, they're just copying Facebook and sort of putting in a bit of an algorithm and sharing, bubbling up content that you like more of that's now happening, and it's pretty much my eyes got open to that when I had so many people say, "Oh, loving your stuff on LinkedIn," and I'm like, that's not where I get my stuff. Like, I get my stuff from other places. But the fact that a lot of people go into LinkedIn as a bit of I'm going through, there's that
They're
article.
in professional news mode. That's where I find it.
Yeah. So it is a bit in that space. It's going to be interesting to see if they stuff it up. I see they're heading down the celebrity route. Would you like to follow Michael Jordan? Michael Jordan is not posting on LinkedIn, right? He's not. And so it's very much the Twitter model of, chasing the celebrities. I don't know if LinkedIn wants that. I don't think it needs that. No. So anyway, we've done the recap. What is your, Kevin Durant style, what is your social media MVP? Now, this could be either a personal MVP or you can have your Richmond head of digital hat on, or you can name both. What's your social media platform that's the MVP?
It is boring, but after all that we've just spoken about, I have to say Facebook, because if Facebook went down tomorrow, we'd probably lose a third of our traffic. So that's quite a scary thought. And
considering the ferocity that Zuck is chasing down Snapchat, you don't want to make an enemy of him.
Absolutely. and they've got their eyes on the prize for the next 10 years, like where they're going with augmented reality and virtual reality. They're the next step changes. Like, what's next after social media? Well, it's AR and VR. We don't know exactly how that'll play out, but it's starting to get a little bit more mainstream.
And it is a good point, because it does lend into, and they're doing, and for mine, it's still a way off, right? We don't know where it is, but what Facebook is doing well, it's giving us enough entrees, 360-degree panoramas that you can take with your phone, live 360 streaming, so you can start. People are doing it on their phone; they're not putting on headsets yet. But it's at least saying, well, this is what the environment's going to be like. And so maybe in 2 or 3 years' time, you'll have a 360-degree camera sitting on the wing and you can pretend that you're sitting on the wing. And they're just starting to condition people to that. Yeah. And, that's what the Oculus Rift buy was, and that's where they're headed.
Yeah. They're clunky at the moment, all the headsets, but they'll get better.
Yeah, exactly. Last but not least, where can people find you on the internet if they want to connect and say hello?
As I mentioned, I'm not tweeting much these days, but I am Brad_Paton there, and obviously on LinkedIn and all the other various platforms.
All right, we will have links to yourself on Twitter and LinkedIn, and obviously also you can send Brad a message on the Sports Biz Slack. You recently joined.
Yes, I am there as well.
I think there's a few Tigers in there. So we started to sort of, hey, let's have some questions Q&A posts. So when this goes up, if you've got a follow-up question with Brad, jump onto the Sports Biz Slack. But thank you very much for coming on the show, and all the best for the rest of the season. I have to say that because my mum would have said, make sure you say "Go Tigers."
Thanks, Sean, for having me, and I would say good luck to Go Pies as well.
Oh, this is one of the most awkward conversations ever. That never happens, people, from a rivalry point of view. But yeah, thank you very much for coming on the show, and we'll see you at the MCG sometime soon.
Thanks, Sean.
Sign up for Sports Geek News at sportsgeekhq.com/sign up now.
Thanks again to Brad Paton. You can get him and you can reach him via Twitter, Brad_Paton, Paton. That's exactly his same handle in the Sports Biz Slack community. So please join us in the Sports Biz Slack community. Some really good conversations are happening in there, and people are sharing some great stuff, some good conversations around the media, some digital, and like I said, from a point of view of Brad, I will kick off a little bit of a Q&A in Sports Biz Slack sort of going forward. I thought it worked well in the lead up to the chat with Damien. So I'll prompt and tag Brad in there. If you've got a question of what it's like to be behind the digital of a vast digital army that Richmond have, please reach out to Brad. Brad_Paton, Paton. One last thing. We did talk a little bit about podcasting. We did talk a little bit about getting iTunes reviews. I use a tool called mypodcastreviews.com that goes and checks every iTunes store for reviews. We are up to 112. So thank you very much for the people who have across 10 different countries. So if you have listened and you are listening in different parts of the world, whether it be the US, the UK, Sweden, Germany, Ireland, New Zealand, Canada, Belgium, Netherlands, thank you very much for listening from those countries. If you haven't left a review, I would super appreciate it. Simply go to sportsgeekhq.itunes. It will direct you straight to the store. I know iTunes don't make it easy, so I do appreciate the time and effort you put in. As a note of thanks. Last thing I wanted to sort of do is just a bit of an update on how things are going with Chunky Media. For those of you who don't know, I started Chunky Media with my good friend Steve Vallis, and it is effectively pushing similar services that Sports Geek pushes, but into a wider corporate market. It's very hard to pitch a startup or a large retail group as Sports Geek. They think they actually want someone they can't understand the sports connection. So that's sort of the way it works. I bring the marketing tech side of the equation, and Steve brings the brand and the messaging side of the equation. And one of the things that we have been doing, just sort of to build the Chunky Media brand, is running some digital business events. You can go to digitalbusinessevents.com.au to check it out. We just recently ran our second event this week. It was based on e-commerce, and the idea is we're going to do different panels and different events on different verticals. The first one was on enterprise marketing and how digital is impacting that. Looking at, we had a guest from Optus, we had a guest from Village Roadshow, and we also had a guest from City of Melbourne. This week we had e-commerce with Vino Mofo, an exceptional wine retailer here in Australia. Also Adore Beauty, Kate Morris doing terrific things, and also L'Oreal. So we had some really good events. The reason I'm telling you guys is, one, we're going to continue doing that and expand that, and again over multiple verticals. And so most likely in the next couple of months we will do one, a sports business focused one, where I can do a bit of crossover with the Sports Geek family. So keep an eye out for that. Digitalbusiness.com.au, strictly for Melbourne for now, but we are looking to push those events a little bit broader into Sydney and Brisbane as the year progresses. So please check that out, digitalbusiness.com.au if you haven't. sign up and check out what. And for me, it's always about learning what other industries are doing, and that's the advantage that I'm getting, and bringing that value back to Sports Geek, both listeners and also clients. If you want to know about e-commerce, go talk to the people that are the pure play, that are going up against big retailers that are fighting for every single dollar. If you can take some of that knowledge across to sport, you'll definitely be selling more merch. So until next episode, stay tuned after the credits. James is going to put in that famous Richmond theme song. As I said with Brad, it's a tradition here in the AFL, the Australian rules, where the players will sing the club song at the end of the game. So I know this. I've done this deliberately to make sure that my mum listens to the whole episode. We're going to finish off the sounds of the game with the Richmond Football Club singing the song with a lot of fervour after a big win. So until next episode, my name is Sean Callanan, and you've been listening to the Sports Geek Podcast.
Like the Sports Geek Podcast? Find us on Facebook.com/SportsGeek. Check out which teams work with Sports Geek at SportsGeekHQ.com/clients. Please leave a review on iTunes. Go to SportsGeekHQ.com/iTunes. Thanks for listening to the Sports Geek Podcast.